There we go. Good evening, everyone. I see that the participants are loading in from the waiting room, so I'm going to wait a couple seconds here to let everybody get loaded in. Okay, it looks like everybody's in from the waiting room that's here for right now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. Welcome tonight to tonight's educational webinar. I'm Jim Lumbella. I'm the CEO of Connecticut Votes for Animals. Tonight's educational webinar will be recorded, and it is already started, so I just want everyone aware of that. Also, our recording will be available on our YouTube channel in a few days, so you can come back and review all of the great information that we're going to cover this evening. We do have a few brief slides. Then we're going to jump into our educational topic this evening as well. I do ask everybody to mute your microphones if your microphones were not automatically muted when you joined this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to start off today with a big thanks to the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut. They are our sponsors for the educational webinar this evening. So again, shout out and thank you to our Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut. I'll do a brief introduction of Connecticut Votes for Animals, and then we're going to talk just briefly a couple slides on how to get involved. The number one question we hear at CVA is how can I get involved and how can I make a difference? Then we're going to have one slide that is for CVA's 2024 legislative priorities, and I'll do a slide review of where we are right now in the session. Then we're going to have our guest speaker in our presentation, and we will have a wrap up and question and answers if time permits. So please enter your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will collect those throughout the presentation this evening and get to those as time permits. I do want to give a shout out this evening for an individual I saw registered, Representative David Michelle, for joining us tonight. So thank you, Representative, for joining us as well. And also a shout out to the board, the CVA board and advisory council members who are joining us this evening. We couldn't do this without all of your support. Next slide. So we're going to jump right in here. Wait for the slide to change here. Here we go. Connecticut Votes for Animals. We are champions for the humane legislation for all of Connecticut's animals. Our website is www.ctvotesforanimals.org. We're a grassroots advocacy nonprofit organization that aims to create a more peaceful future for animals by lobbying for stronger protections. CVA was founded in 2008, and we have over 8,000 supporters and social media followers statewide currently. Together, we advocate for pro-animal choices. We educate the public about animal protection issues. We rally supporters to drive passage of animal-friendly laws and defeat harmful proposals. And we safeguard animal interests by making their well-being a priority for our elected officials. Tonight is all about the educational side of the house, and we're going to talk on an important topic. And I also want to stop for a moment and just commend all of you for being here. What you learned this evening, I ask you to carry forward, share with your neighbors, share with your friends, because we're going to have a lot of great information. Number one question, how you can get involved, as you see on the screen. And we're just going to talk about that briefly. Go ahead, next slide, Linda. The Connecticut General Assembly website, www.cga.ct.gov, has a wealth of information for you. Make sure that you know where this is. Visit it often. We're going to show you one of the most important things. Next slide, Linda, is how to find your legislator. Very important that you know where to find your legislator. Connecticut Votes for Animals website provides a path to the CGA tool. And in this tool, all you enter, you take the representative drop-down menu to find your legislator, type in your town, your street, your house number, and click find. And the top two rows are your state legislators, of a senator and a rep. Write these down, make note of who your individuals are. On this slide here, this is just an example of what it looks like for a random address. So you can see what the report produces there as well. Next slide. Quick recap on that. The most effective thing you can do is to get to know your legislators. Learn which committees they serve on, and their leadership roles, and also visit their official website page. Look for committees that address animal issues, joint committees of the environment, for example, joint committee on the judiciary. Sign up for the email list, follow their Facebook page, their Twitter accounts, etc., and reach out to them once you know the individuals. Next slide. Once you know your elected official, contact them often. Why? Just to introduce yourself, let them know how you feel about specific bills. Call or write during district office hours as well. And one of the things CVA sends out is legislative action alerts throughout the session to rally our constituent support for bills or to oppose action that will negatively impact animals. And we depend on voters like you to let legislators know that animals matter. Next slide. A few more examples of how to get involved. You can testify at committee hearings. You can organize and attend a district meeting of like-minded animal advocates with your representative. You can write letters to the editor in your local paper. And again, this presentation with all this information will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can come back and visit this often and get a refresher as needed. Next slide is an example of our action alerts that CVA puts out. These come out during the session. And again, you can register for these at ConnecticutVotesForAnimals.org. And as the session goes on, we send out different alerts, what's coming up in front of the committee, what's coming up for proposed bills, and so forth. So important to stay in the loop, and CVA helps you stay in the loop on those issues. The next slide, just a brief slide and a quick look over our legislative priorities so far for this 2024 session. One of right on the top there, tonight's educational focus is on HB 5217, an act concerning the use of certain rodenticides. There was a public hearing held on 2/28. It's also on the agenda to come up tomorrow as well. We also testified for the minor revisions to the agriculture-related status, the definition of an animal, HB 5223. Also 5224, the protection of the spiny dogfish, which prohibits the possession, sale, trade, or distribution of shark fins. Coming up tomorrow, on tomorrow's hearing as well, CVA will be testifying and submitting testimony for SB 190, an act concerning the use of neonicotinoids. Now that's a tongue twister if I ever had one. The public hearing on that is tomorrow, as well as SB 196, an act concerning the harvesting of rabbits for local food supply. Please oppose this bill. Along with an act concerning the sale of certain balloons, SB 291. And those have been our legislative alerts and what we're watching. And of course, we're going to continue to monitor the session. We've partnered with Focus Government Affairs, is our lobbyist at the Capitol, who works with us as well. And now we're going to jump into HB 5217, which is tonight's educational focus. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Christine Cummings, the president of A Place Called Hope. And I want to start off just by thanking Christine and her team for the amazing work and advocacy they have done for our birds and for our wildlife. And tonight we're going to immerse ourselves with Christine and learn all about SGARs and their impact on our wildlife and even our pets. So with that, Christine, thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to jump right into our topic because you have so much information to cover. And I'm going to hand over the presentation to you at this point. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to collaborate with everybody at Connecticut Votes for Animals, as well as all the animal advocates out there right now that might be watching this webinar tonight. Thanks for joining us because there is a lot to cover. I am the director and co-founder of A Place Called Hope, and we started taking care of predatory birds of prey back in 2005. We are official as a nonprofit 501c3 in 2007. And our goal is to rehabilitate birds of prey that have become injured, orphaned, sick, with the intention of getting them back to the wild whenever possible. It was about 5 years ago that we started to notice some of these patients coming in that were showing classic symptoms of what we call secondary poisoning with anticoagulants. Now, about 5 years ago and further back, we had a little bit more luck with some of these cases, some of these patients coming in where we found ourselves able to treat them and reverse what was going on and get them back into the wild. And then slowly we started to notice a lot more of them were dying and came in actively dying. And it was too late for us to reverse what was happening. And we're going to talk about why that is as we go on to the next slide. Next slide, Linda. Thank you. So anticoagulants, whoops, back one more. There you go. Anticoagulants are something that is used as a rodenticide, and it basically is an overdose of an anticoagulant. And an anticoagulant, what that actually does is it lessens the body's ability to utilize vitamin K. All of our bodies have something called vitamin K within our systems that help us to recycle and produce vitamin K. That helps us to coagulate or clot our blood. And it's something that we all have within our bodies. And when you are on an anticoagulant, it actually lessens your body's ability to work with that vitamin K to clot the blood. So if you are taking, let's say, a blood thinner, a lot of you might know about being put on a blood thinner where you are to be very careful about falling. You can bruise much easier because you have anticoagulants within your system more than most people. So vitamin K is absolutely necessary to clot the blood, and without it, you will hemorrhage or bleed excessively. Next slide. So we all know that everything is connected. And secondary poisoning is something that we're talking about tonight with the predatory animals that might eat, let's say, a targeted animal. Relay toxicity is something that happens when an animal eats a poison, and then that animal becomes food to another animal who then is now getting that poison secondarily. And you can see by the chart up on your screen how it actually will work its way well up into the food chain and affect many more animals. Now, next slide is fine. Anticoagulants come in two categories, something called first generation anticoagulant rodenticides and something called second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Now, the ingredients are all listed on this chart. You can see in first generation, these ingredients were very popular starting in the 1940s, 1950s. And over time, what they started to notice is that they weren't as effective. And the reasons for that is because first generation anticoagulant rodenticides are going to work by inhibiting that vitamin K production again. And what happens is the animals eat that poison and their body cannot produce that vitamin K that clots the blood. And because first generation anticoagulants don't work immediately. It takes a few feedings. It's going to take multiple feedings. What happens is the animals start to feel sick before they get a lethal dose. So when they start to feel sick, they start to avoid the potential food that might make making them feel sick. So in other words, if you eat something that's bad and you're not feeling well after you've eaten it, you're not going to go back to eat more of it. Well, rodents and animals are pretty smart. So if they start to feel sick after they've ingested something, they do start to avoid that food. So that's where second generation anticoagulants were born. They came out in the 1970s, and their ingredients are a little bit more powerful, and it only requires one dose of feeding to acquire that lethal dose, which we'll talk about more in the next slide. Okay, maybe not the next slide. Bear with me, we'll get there. But what is it that we're actually afraid of? Now, obviously, nobody should have to live with rodents. Rodents can spread disease. They can cause all sorts of property damage. They can affect agriculture and our food storage. And it's not something that is, sanitary or pleasant to wake up to or open your cabinets and find rodents. So next slide. So poisons. So why did poisons become so popular in the first place? Well, one of the reasons that poisons is so popular is because they are designed to work very fast. They're pretty efficient at doing what they do, which is killing whatever animal. And since rodents are usually our nuisance targeted animals, they're food motivated. They're easily baited by food where their poison is put inside of that food. The chemical corporations, as well as pest management providers, also will thrive on this repeat business. It's a repeat profit business model because when you put down poisons, those poisons are ingested by the rodents. The rodents don't die at the bait station. They go off somewhere else to die, and the poisons have to be continuously put down. So it's a perfect business profit model. It really also works well for what we call neophobic species, like rats. They're very intelligent. So when they see that their family members, let's say, are dead in, let's say, a snap trap, they avoid the snap trap. The beautiful thing about poisons for this kind of industry is that they don't die at the bait station. They don't eat the poison and just drop dead. It's going to take a 2 to 10 day delay before that animal no longer has the vitamin K within its system to stop itself from clotting, from bleeding. So when you use poisons, it only perpetuates the problem because it never addresses the root issue. So the root issue, you can see here in this photograph, you've got some garbage available for rodents to feed off of. Next slide. Next, yeah, thank you. So when you're using the poisons, what happens is there's an initial die-off. So all of a sudden those rats, those mice are no longer as abundant because the poison has killed some of them. But what happens when some of the rodent population has been altered like that is there's more food abundant for the remaining rodents who say, okay, there's enough to eat. Next slide. We've got enough food, which means we need to make more babies. They're very prolific by nature, rodents. So whenever there is an opening in their population, they're going to have an abundance in their reproductive cycle. So that's, again, where poisons are just perpetuating the problem, because with every die-off, there's a reproductive explosion of more rodents. Next slide. So when they're threatened, we know that mouse litters can be anywhere from 5 to 6 pups per litter, and a rat litter can be anywhere from 5 to 10 pups per litter. Next slide, please. The reproduction cycle can really add up quickly, and a nuisance problem can really fast turn into an infestation. There are 2 facts here that I just really like to share in the presentation, because for anyone that might be with some, let's say, mice in their, let's say, basement, you're going to be able to know that a mouse den is going to be probably somewhere between 10 and 50 feet from the nest location. So wherever you're seeing a mouse, they're not too far away where they're nesting. So it helps to alleviate the problem when you know how close to look for the areas that they might be nesting. So again, poisons are only going to perpetuate the vicious cycle, because every time there's an explosion, you got to put more poisons down. Again, a good profit model. Next slide. Next slide. There you go. And how are these rodenticides actually applied? The ingredients are mixed into what we call a bait block, a liquid, or a pellet, and they are placed inside of something called a bait box, a bait drinker, or a tray. Now we're talking again about anticoagulant rodenticides. So this is for both first and second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. This photograph here is really to give you an idea of what those bait boxes look like. They do come in different colors now. They do, some of them look like rocks. This is actually a bait pellet. This is not something that you would see a professional putting down. This is something that you would more likely buy at your home improvement stores. This is a poison drink station where you see the liquid would go into these drink cups where the rodents would then drink from those stations, and then the poison bait trays where pellets are applied, or little pieces are applied that would be put on the interior of a structure. Next slide, please. So the dangers of these applications: obviously, bait attracts all animals because food is being offered. It does not just simply target the nuisance targeted animal. You cannot streamline any poison to one specific species. Bait's a poison that is going to affect anything that ingests it. And of course, when bait boxes are placed either inside or outside the structures, they're not exclusive. I can't stress this enough, but they're not exclusive to just the nuisance target. The hole, whether it's for a mouse or a rat, it's large enough for anything that can fit inside that hole, or even put its little hand or arm inside that hole to pull some of the bait out of the box and carry it off or distribute it elsewhere in the environment. The other issue or danger of these applications is that bait boxes are not always secured down, and they can often be dragged off by larger animals like raccoons into the environment, exposing even more victims. And of course, back to the fact that the baited victim does not die at the station itself. So that baited victim's going to eat the lethal poisons inside, but it does not die at the bait station. Next slide. Victims of any of these methods of putting down poison can include invertebrates, other rodents, songbirds, of course, our wildlife, pets, and God forbid, our small children. Now, invertebrates, it's something that's very interesting about the invertebrates is there have been a lot of studies done on insects getting into these bait stations and ingesting the poisons. And what's really interesting and scary is that insects don't die from the poisons. They actually just ingest it and become little poison bait themselves, because then they go off into the environment. And we all know bugs are very important to our ecosystem, and many different animals eat many different types of bugs. So they're ingesting these poisons through even eating the bugs. Next slide, please. Obviously, we've all heard about domesticated pets. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to us on our social media page admitting that their own dog or their cat had ingested rodenticide secondhand. And the beauty is with dogs and cats and small children is that they live with us humans. So if we recognize there's a problem and our animal or our child is sick, we're going to rush them to the animal hospital or to the hospital immediately to help figure out what's going on. So their chance of having their lives saved is much far greater than our wildlife, who of course do not have the luxury of knocking on people's doors saying, hey, I don't feel good, can you help me? Next slide. First generation anticoagulants, I don't want anyone to mistake these for not being deadly. They are extremely deadly when they are eaten and ingested at the level of a lethal dose. The ingredients in first generation anticoagulant rodenticides are the ones that you're going to find on the store shelves at your home improvement stores, your drug stores, your hardware stores, and what have you. Those ingredients are legal for the general public to use. The way that these ingredients work is that it requires more feedings by the targeted animal before it takes effect. And again, remember what I was saying earlier about if an animal eats something and it doesn't feel good, it might start to avoid that particular food that's not making them feel good. It also has a cumulative effect for the predators. So a predator is going to have to eat more affected targeted rodents in order for it to bring them down. But while they are in the mode of sublethal poisoning doses, those animals are becoming immunocompromised. Their health is starting to fail. We're seeing more and more cases of mange. We're seeing more and more cases of animals that are just not healthy. And it's because they have sublethal doses of anticoagulant rodenticides within their systems. It also affects their clarity, which makes them a little bit more likely to have injuries or to experience conflicts that they would normally otherwise avoid. They're easier to prey upon as well because they are not as clear, so they become easier targets for other predators. And with anticoagulant, the antidote would be vitamin K1 injections with some success if caught early. Now, in the beginning of this webinar, I was mentioning how we used to see birds coming in, predatory birds of prey coming in, that were suffering from secondary poisoning from the anticoagulant classification, where we were seeing more success at treating them because they weren't at the lethal dose yet. So it's safe for us to assume that they had ingested first generation anticoagulant rodenticides and not second generation, which that's what's replaced the first generation because they are more potent and more toxic and more deadly. They are the ones that are not regulated by the US EPA, unfortunately. The US EPA, we're going to get into that in a slide or two forward. These second generation anticoagulant rodenticides are more deadly after only one session of feeding. It no longer is multiple feedings. It's going to be one session of feeding that delivers the lethal dose. But remember what I said about it taking 2 to 10 days before the body depletes of that vitamin K. During that time, the animal returns to the bait station and continues to eat that same poison. It's already got a lethal dose in its system, but because it's not going to die right away, it can continue to eat, increasing the potency of the poison within its own body. So that also increases the chance of secondary poisoning taking place in predators eating only one victim instead of that cumulative effect that was going on with the first generation victims. It's also got a longer half-life. It leaches into our soil and our water and our air and sticks around a lot longer, causing more exposure. And it stores longer within body tissue and the liver of the victims themselves, meaning that an animal who would just go off and die in the environment, who gets eaten by a predator or a scavenger who comes along, it's going to still affect that animal who's ingested the victim even after 300 days. There's no antidote, again, for wildlife, because by the time they come into wildlife rehabilitation centers, the damage is already their damage is already done, and they're too far gone when they are ingesting the second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Our chance for reversing that is pretty zip, null, and void. Next slide, please. Here is a good chart that gives you a really good example of what I'm talking about half-life in liver tissue. So with the first generation, you can see quite a difference from our second generation anticoagulant rodenticides and how long they last. Next slide, please. So who is really at fault here when it comes to all of these secondary poisoning and these non-intended victims and unintentional victims? The US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, actually removed the second generation anticoagulants from the public store shelves in 2014. And the reason they did that is because they were simply too dangerous. And they still are too dangerous. But what was decided back then was that pest management providers could still use second generation anticoagulant rodenticides because they are licensed to do so. And they should be only using them sparingly because they are just simply too toxic. Well, instead of putting that into some sort of law, what they decided to do to regulate the second generation anticoagulants was to sell them by bulk, basically in minimum packages of 8 pounds. So in other words, that was meant to discourage the public from buying 8 pounds of poison, because most public homeowners are going to go out and buy something in a much smaller fashion. But the problem here is that they're still very affordable. So even at 8 pounds, it's affordable, and you can go online and purchase these, even though they're not sold on the store shelves. They're only sold through the internet, which is a loophole that HB 5217, the bill for these rodenticides, is trying to close, which is a good thing. We want to close that, but it's still, again, anyone can still get their hands on these 8 pounds of poison. One of the real reasons for that is because there is such a high demand for a fast, affordable solution. And again, people really forget that putting down poisons only perpetuates the problem. So it really puts the poisons in the hands of the pest management providers as their number one tool, because most people are demanding an immediate response. They're very unwilling to live with rodents. Again, nobody should have to live with those rodents, but it's putting the pest management providers in a position of providing these poisons, which also just happens to be something that fits that profitable business model again, but because they're affordable and they seem to be working. And that's what people want to see. They want to know that the rodent population is being affected without looking past the initial die-off. So when I've talked to pest management professionals, they claim that customers can't always afford the sanitation, exclusion, or safe alternative strategies, and they're not willing to wait. It's really important that people understand that the root of the cause is something that needs to be addressed in order to solve the problem long term. So that's where the reality is, in the long run, it makes more sense to put the money in up front with the sanitation, exclusion, integrated pest management strategies in place to solve the problem instead of throwing poisons at them. Next slide, please. So the bottom line is it's unsafe no matter who is actually using these poisons. It does not matter if you've got a license to do so. It does not matter if you don't have a license. Though what the problem is that it's a poison, and poison is poison no matter what. And there's no such thing as a safe poison. And here on this slide, you're going to see some of the names that might be associated with first generation and second generation. But I've also thrown in here two other classifications of rodenticides, and that is the neurotoxins and the vitamin D overdose, basically. I cannot pronounce this word, the cholecalciferol. So basically what those two other classifications are rodenticides that are frowned upon for a lot of reasons because they don't have an antidote. So when you talk to anyone that is in the pest management provider industry, they are going to say that they don't want to put down the neurotoxins or the vitamin D overdosing because there's no antidote. But again, let's go back to the fact that anticoagulants, the antidote for the second generation, is not likely because it is so potent and powerful. And by the time we know what's going on, it's usually too late. Next slide. With predators, they are designed to prey upon debilitated animals. So they're looking for the weak, they're looking for the elderly, they're looking for the sick. And that is because they are designed to also conserve their energy. Predators don't like to put on big, long, strenuous chases for their prey, for their meals. They want to surprise attack and grab and go. That's just the way they're designed. And predators are pretty smart. So they become accustomed to areas where they see a lot of activity with the prey animals that they're hunting. And nowadays they are finding that anywhere that we see all these bait boxes, which is pretty much everywhere, especially in our metro regions, there are more and more predators hanging around the actual bait stationed areas because they're attracted to seeing those nuisance targeted animals going in and out of the bait stations, as well as hunting the ones who have become sick after the 2 to 10 day waiting period in the area. Next slide, please. Our wildlife really doesn't stand a chance because, again, predators, predatory birds of prey in particular, will mask their symptoms until the last moment. We often get calls from the public that the bird of prey just literally fell from the sky or dropped from a tree. And that's because they will act as if they are in the best condition as possible in order to not become preyed upon themselves. So they mask their symptoms and try to act as stoic and healthy as possible. So they are not going to come down saying, hey, you know, I don't feel good right now and maybe I need some help. Next slide. So when I submitted this webinar prior to tonight, the numbers, our numbers have actually changed. So basically, wildlife rehabilitators in Connecticut are the ones who get to actually cradle the aftermath of the use of these rodenticides. And here at a place called Hope, we have actually to date submitted 79 specimens for testing. 79 tests have been completed. And out of the 79 tests that have been completed, 68 of them have returned positive for one or more of the ingredients of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Now, let me repeat that because it's kind of a sobering reality. 79 specimens, meaning dead animals, submitted for testing for what we call an anticoagulant rodenticide panel, where they test the liver tissue to find out which ingredients are responsible for their deaths. And what they have found in the testing, and we test through UConn and Michigan State University, is 68 have tested positive for one or more of the ingredients of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Now, we also in that testing are still at 3 out of 79 have resulted positive for first generation anticoagulant rodenticides as well as second generation. So they've had a dose of both. Now, we anticipate if we get what we want with HB 5217, where we're asking them to amend this bill to a more a stronger language verbiage to actually ban the use of second generation anticoagulants in Connecticut. We anticipate that we will start to see more poisonings from the first generation classification again. That's yet to be seen, but that would be a likely scenario because we're asking for the more potent of these rodenticides to be banned, which would mean the first generations will be used more so. Next slide, please. So some of the symptoms involved with these cases that are coming into wildlife rehab centers are animals that are behaving very lethargic, they're slowed down, they're confused, they're disoriented, they may be stumbling or circling. I often get calls from people saying there is a bird, I think it's got a broken wing because it's spinning in circles and it's actually trying to hold its body up by a wing. There's usually blood coming from any or all of its orifices. So its eyes, its nose, its ears, its ear privates. There's blood in their stool. There's respiratory distress where their lungs are becoming affected. We often see bruising or bleeding underneath the skin tissue. And minor cuts or major cuts, we have trouble stopping the bleeding because there's no coagulation or clotting of that blood because, again, the lack of the vitamin K. And ultimately, they go into either seizures or cardiovascular shock. And it is one of the hardest things as a wildlife rehabilitator to get in an animal that is actively dying that you cannot save, and you do everything you can to save them. And this has been a big frustration, not only in Connecticut, but all across our nation and globally from the use of rodenticide and anticoagulant poisons. Next slide, please. This is a perfect example of a bird that was just behaving oddly. He was down on the ground. This is a first-year red-tailed hawk who was just unaware of its surroundings, the people around it, the photographs being taken. The bird just was confused, and it was easily picked up, and it did not survive. It was a victim that was in our testing. Next slide. Here is another typical presentation. We'll get a bird, it looks fine physically, but then we notice right away it's bleeding from inside of its, what we call its trachea or in its esophagus. This slide for me, it's a little hard to see in this particular coloration, but there's blood in the trachea. Next slide, please. Here's a close-up vision of that same bird with the blood inside the mouth. Next slide. And here is a beautiful example of a barred owl who did not survive with the bruising underneath the skin tissue. You can see that dark bruised area. That is not normal tissue color. And that's what starts to happen at the later stages where they start to actually hemorrhage or bleed excessively. Next slide. This one speaks to my heart. This was a real tough case for us. This bird was a great horned owl that we had actually rescued along with its sibling out of its nest after its mother had come down from rodenticide poisoning and tested positive for second generation, by the way. She died from second generation anticoagulants. Her babies were still up in a nest. It was early in a season. We had to go up and retrieve the babies because the male great horned owls do not feed the young. They bring food back, but they don't rip and tear, and they were nestlings. One of the nestlings was sick, and we were able to save its life. The other one didn't seem to be affected. It all depends on what the parents are feeding the babies, but the mom ate enough to die. And we raised these babies at our center with a foster couple of great horned owls who took care of them. And when it was time for them to release, we actually released them from our center on the same property because we have a wild pair of great horned owl adults that come in and check out the babies as they're aging. And as they were old enough to leave and fly off and join them, they took them under their wing, more or less, and taught them how to hunt and be wild and free. And this particular baby was only, I don't know, maybe 5 months old when she also came down from poisoning, secondary poisoning. She also tested positive for second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. And this was a real hard one for us because she came back to the center and put herself in front of one of our vestibule doors. And I knew immediately something was wrong because she was on the ground, and I picked her up and this is what we found. So somebody even close to our center is using these deadly, toxic, potent, awful poisons. Next slide, please. So when a suspected case comes in, there's not much we can do in figuring out which anticoagulant is responsible until the animal has died. There's no test for us. All we can do is look at the symptoms that are going on and kind of rule things out. But one of the things we do is we'll take a drop of blood, we'll put it on a slide, and we will time how long it takes for that blood to coagulate or thicken. Normal blood is going to start thickening around the edges and start to dry up, one drop of blood on a slide, in about 3 to 4 minutes. If that blood is still liquid after 3 to 4 minutes, we know that we're likely dealing with an anticoagulant rodenticide. Next slide, please. So when it's time to treat a suspect, we are doing vitamin K1 shots subcutaneously. That means underneath the skin. We're also giving them a vitamin K supplement by mouth. We're pushing fluids to help hydrate them and keep their bodies flushed and try to flush their system out. We keep them warm because their bodies are unable to produce the proper body heat. We keep them hydrated. We keep them medicated for comfort. And of course, we feed them. Now, if their lungs are affected, we do use an oxygen tank, 30 to 45-minute intervals at 2% flow rate. And once their lungs are starting to fill up with blood, we understand that it's too late. There's nothing we can do. And they are basically drowning in their own blood. Now, I know that's hard to hear, but that is what we are dealing with as wildlife rehabilitators cleaning up the mess. For all the people out there who are using these poisons, who get to unsee the consequences, or the ones who get to see it firsthand. So at that point, we do consider humane euthanasia because, again, once the lungs are affected to that degree, they're basically drowning to death, and we don't like that. So we will opt to euthanize. Next slide, please. I'm not going to get into this slide other than to say, again, we don't know if it's first generation or second generation until the animal has died. So we have to treat the suspect if it starts to respond to treatment for up to 6 weeks, whether it's first generation or second generation. So that's a long-term rehab case for treatment. Just so everyone's aware, that takes a lot of resources from rehab centers to treat these animals for 6 weeks. And it's longer than that they're going to be in care at a wildlife rehabilitation center. But it's 6 weeks of that vitamin K1. Next slide. So what do we do to stop this whole vicious cycle? And again, I'm going to go back to the sanitation and exclusion that we were kind of addressing earlier in this webinar as the first line of defense against any of the rodents that might be causing an issue in any kind of structure. We like to say it is seek out the source, basically, SOS. So next slide. What you need to do is look for the 3 main things, which is food, water, and of course, an area or a place for them to safely nest or have nesting material. So you have to always make sure that your food is put away properly, stored in chew-proof containers. You want to make sure there's no water available for rodents to drink from. And of course, anything that they can make nests out of, which is anything soft. Next slide. Exclusion work can get expensive, yes, but it also can be something that can be done quite easily as do-it-yourself projects. So you don't have to necessarily pay a professional. You can do a lot of this on your own if you know what to do. And most of it is, you can see the steel wool being put around those exterior pipes. You can see any of the hardware cloth that you can pick up at places like Tractor Supply. You can get any kind of cement or kind of caulking to put around pipes. You want to make sure you seal up vents and chimneys and any access point that a rodent might get in and out of. You want to fill cracks and holes, and you want to go around windows and door frames and Bilco doors and things like that. Next slide. And of course, integrated pest management strategies include the sanitation exclusion strategy methods, as well as the safe non-toxic alternatives. I don't know how many of you have ever tried cayenne pepper, but cayenne pepper is just a brilliant way to deter rodents because they hate it. And most birds don't mind it. So you can actually mix cayenne pepper into your bird seed that you put out for in your bird feeders. And the birds aren't going to be upset by that at all, but the rodents don't like it and they're going to avoid it. There's obviously things that can be used like live traps. These are all humane. Snap traps, zap traps, CO2 traps, any of the sensory repellents. That includes, of course, anything with those spices in it, and any of the oils that you can spray that they just don't like. The oils are beautiful because when you spray any of the oils around foundations and the pathways that rodents travel, they use their whiskers to kind of run alongside the foundations. And as they're using their whiskers, that's helping to help them get through and figure out where they're going. They're gumming them up with those oils, and it just really offends their noses and their eyes, and they don't like it, so they avoid it. Of course, noise is another thing that, remember the old AM radios? Those are wonderful to put in campers and RVs when you're trying to keep rodents out. They don't like noise. They don't want it to be too crazy noisy. And then, of course, there is dry ice. Ever since dry ice has become an alternative non-toxic method, it's become harder to buy and find, unfortunately. But dry ice put directly into rat burrows, with the burrows being sealed off at the entrance or exit, will actually take care of an entire burrow full of rodents quickly. It's kind of like a natural CO2 chamber. And then our favorite, of course, because we're not about any animal suffering, we really like to stress putting out owl nesting boxes or raptor perches to encourage predatory birds of prey to come into your area to do what's natural for them, and that is to hunt and eat the little critters that might be causing you problems. We also really want to stress, a lot of people think that sticky traps or glue boards are a good way to take care of rodents. It's just barbaric. So please, please, please don't use them, because these sticky traps and glue boards, again, like poisons, cannot be exclusive to just the targeted animal, and too many little critters that don't deserve to be on those traps get stuck in them. And even for a mouse or a rat to get stuck on a glue board or a sticky trap, it's just an inhumane way to deal with the problem. Next slide, please. There are some really good new methods that are available that I just want to touch upon, and you can all do your own research into these categories. But the smart technology products are really good for larger metro areas. They're internet based. They have sensors and traps that can be installed above ground, underground, in subway systems, in commercial buildings, and what have you. And they are fantastic because they are monitored through the internet. So when a trap has, let's say, rodents in the trap, there's an alert to empty the trap. So again, back to those neophobic rats that don't like to see their friends or family deceased. They're going to avoid the area. So it's a good way to clean up the trapping and continue on with the control of the rodents. There's also fertility control products. Now, this is the wave of the future, and there are quite a few different companies popping up. There are 3 right now that are being talked about. I like to promote one in particular called Wisdom Good Works, and Good Bites is the product. And the fertility control products are not hormone-based. They're natural ingredients. They actually lessen the fertility of the rodents who are being supplied with the product. And the product itself is really packed with nutrients, and it makes a better rodent for the predators who might be eating that rodent. So it keeps them healthy and strong, but it makes them infertile while they're actually being supplied with the fertility control product. Now, it's a great win-win because it's something that needs to be reapplied on a regular basis. Next slide, please. As it's reapplied, the company, like a pest management professional, can actually still put that into their toolkit, and it can still be a profit building model for them. So this is the company that comes up when you Google smart technology. This is the most common or the most popular company out there, and it's pretty advanced. And it can be kind of pricey, but for those that can afford something like this is a very modern approach. Next slide, please. And back to this fertility control or birth control for rodents. Again, I want to stress, this is not made up of any hormones or chemicals. This is all made from natural products. So it does not have a secondary effect on our wildlife. It does not have a secondary effect on humans. It does not have a secondary effect on children or domesticated animals. One of the complaints had been that it's too expensive, but as it becomes popular and more companies pop up, the price of these particular methods are going to come down. But you can't say that $2.30 a month is expensive. You just can't do it. And that's what Wisdom Good Works is all about. It's a nonprofit company dedicated to solving the secondary poisoning problem out there. So their price is the most beautiful thing that I've seen in this line of strategy against rodents. The other one that's pretty popular is ContraPest. And ContraPest is actually something that is really for rats only. It is about $80 per month, but there is actually a pilot study that was done in Bushnell Park in Hartford, where they have seen great success with ContraPest as well as sanitation exclusion work. And they're in something like 91% of the rodent population has decreased since they started using ContraPest back in, I think it was 2021. Wisdom Good Works right now is not being sold to the public until they get a data application license. So it's being held up over an application license, but they are offering pilot programs to anyone that wants to work with them. And pilot programs are a great way to get in on a free deal, as well as to learn more about the product, and where they can learn more about how they're going to put down their product and work with that data application to monitor the product as it's being used. The more it's used after the rodent population is decreased, it puts them at a more manageable amount to actually use the alternatives with. And the more that the longer it's been down, the less that is actually required. So please consider these safe, hormone-free natural product birth control for rodent methods. Next slide, please. And another thing you can do, of course, is to support a bill to ban second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides in Connecticut. And of course, the bill this year is 5217. And right now, it really needs some strengthening in its language. We need it to ban the use and the sale of second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides statewide, not just the sale. We want the use. We don't want it ever being used across our state. The effects are far too damaging. Again, let me just say it, out of 79 specimens that have been tested, 86 of them, was that right? 68 of them, sorry, had tested positive for one or more of the ingredients of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Next slide. This is just something that I want you all to be aware we have on our website. So it's hard to read, and it's certainly hard to read all now, but it is something you can find on our website at www.aplacecalledhoperaptors.com. We have a whole menu tab dedicated to rodenticides and alternative solutions to rodenticides. So please feel free to visit our website to learn more. And to dive deeper and learn more about this. And I just want to say thank you again to Connecticut Votes for Animals for allowing us to have this opportunity tonight to discuss some of this with you and to hopefully clarify and help you understand the reason why second generation anticoagulant rodenticides are so bad and why we want them banned in the state of Connecticut. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Amazing information, amazing data. When you take a look at the data statistics, I mean, how can you argue with that type of data that we're finding? So I commend you and your team. Just a couple minutes here to spare. I just want to see, I think a couple questions come in. I want to just quickly take a look at that, see if I'm able to see them. Let's see here. So do we need to be concerned with a shortage of rodents for birds of prey with the birth control?
I love that question. No, we don't, because there are plenty of rodents out there naturally. There are plenty of prey animals out there, and what we want are prey animals out there that are not poisoned. So by using birth control in the areas where there is a need, where there's a nuisance issue, infestation, or a nuisance problem, instead of using the poisons, this is actually going to help our predatory wildlife, birds of prey, as well as any other wild animal out there that preys upon rodents.
Excellent. That's a good question. Another question we have here, it says, will we talk about banning glue traps too?
I would love to get glue traps banned. I can't stress enough how barbaric they are and what a cruel way for any animal to die. Glue traps are just an awful, whoever created that was not thinking that one through. So I would love to see glue traps banned. I'd love to see all the poisons banned and glue traps thrown in there as well. But one thing at a time here. Right now, our focus really is on those second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Again, our testing has proven that that is the biggest offender out there, even over the first generation. Again, back to first generation, we don't want any animal to suffer from these anticoagulant rodenticides, but with that first generation classification, we had a better chance at reversing the damaging effects because we would get those patients in sooner before they were at the lethal level. So if we had to choose a poison, then we would go again with those first generation anticoagulants. They have an antidote for domesticated pets, small children, and our wildlife has a better chance. It's still going to kill a lot of wild animals out there, but it's way better than the second generation anticoagulants.
Definitely, definitely. Let's see, we have another question here. Does New York or Mass have any restrictions on these rodenticides?
I'm really glad you asked that too, because the truth is right now, today, I know that Vermont just came up with an article about how they are joining forces to try to ban second generation in their state. We know Massachusetts have been actively, just as long as we have here in Connecticut, been working to get second generation anticoagulants also banned statewide. And New York has just reached out, like maybe 2 days ago, they reached out to me, a group of people in New York, asking how do they begin the process of trying to get them banned in New York. So New York's going to follow suit. We need, obviously, California is the one, they're the lead. They're the ones who have done it already. The British of Columbia, they've done it as well. There's been no outbreak of rodent infestation where there's been any health hazards to humans. It's been successful, and the the pest management providers have utilized other methods and they're still in business. So it has not affected their businesses or their livelihood as the opposition will have you think it would. So yes, New York and Massachusetts are working on it. Have they actually succeeded yet? They're kind of neck and neck with us here in Connecticut working on it, trying to get there.
Excellent. Another viewer here is asking if they do spot one of those black bait boxes, at a business or so forth, what can they do? What should they do?
The best thing to do is obviously don't touch the box. That would be illegal. You don't know what's inside that box. Let's say, for instance, a black box just like that might have birth or fertility control products inside. So without knowing what's in that box, the best thing you can do is go into the storefront or the commercial building, the medical building, wherever it is that box is, and talk to somebody in management. If you go on our website, there's also a spot where you can actually get information or a template letter that you can provide to any place that has those bait boxes outside of their facility to help you address that problem with whoever is in charge. So you want to go up the chain of command basically and write to whomever and anyone who will listen to you, and that template on our website will help you do that. There is also an organization called Raptors Are the Solution, or RATS, which is kind of clever. Raptors Are the Solution.org. They're out of California, and they have all kinds of information, all kinds of studies. You can read so much more than you ever wanted to know about rodenticides and toolkits and how to address companies that are using them. They even give out awards to places that stop using them, which is a brilliant way to encourage companies from using those poisons, picking up the poisons, and then they get an award.
Very true. There you go. One other last question here, and then I do have a couple kudos for you as well too, from some of our viewers. Besides notifying local representatives, does it help to send messages directly to the environmental committee, and who should we direct it to?
That's a great question for Connecticut Votes for Animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Send it to the environmental committee, and I'll also your representative. If your representative sits on the environmental committee, watch our alerts. Our alerts will also have information on there that you can use as you submit testimony. You can testify. You don't have to testify in person. You can submit written testimony as well to the environment committee, so you don't have to be on the screen or show up there in person. But they do look at those. They do take count of how many written testimonies come in, how many presentations are put on. So your voice does matter. So I do urge you to reach directly out, especially when these bills come up. Watch our alerts. And if you see an alert, it will also then have a link on that alert directly to the agenda, directly to the committee that's going to be dealing with that issue and so forth. And we'll have specifics on exactly where to mail that support to or how to submit it as well. So good question there. And I'm just going to end here. I know we're at time, but I do want you to know our chair, Colette Griffin, did say thank you for all you're doing to educate and to help birds of prey as well as other wildlife. And I have several other viewers here that have said excellent presentation, a real eye opener, and so forth, Christine. I just want to stop here and just say thank you for this evening. Eye opener for myself, eye opener for our viewers. I ask our viewers again, take what you've learned, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, reach out to your local representative. We are all educated now on this topic and we can speak about it. We understand it. And now that we're aware of it, together we can really make a difference. So that's my ask to all of you out there. Talk about it, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, spread the word so that we're all aware of this. Anything you'd like to end on, Christine? Anything additional?
Yeah, if anybody is interested in this, the presentation in a PDF format, you can email me at hopeforraptors@yahoo.com. That's HOPE, the number 4 Raptors, RAPTORS @yahoo.com. And just know, we've been in this fight for 3 years. And 3 years ago, I didn't know who to contact. I was just like everybody else saying, something's wrong. I don't know who to talk to. What do I do? Who do I contact? And Connecticut Votes for Animals really is where I got my information. So thank you again for existing and for taking care of the animal issues in our state.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tonight we had 107 registered for this event, so we are spreading the word. And as we know, those 107 people will go out and tell multiple people as well. So a big thank you again as we end here to Christine Cummings in a place called Hope. I also want to give a shout out and thank you to our Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut for today's educational webinar. And with that, I'm going to end. Tell everyone to have a great evening here. And thank you again, Christine, for joining us. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.